Hello everyone, this is NCERT as it is lecture on 13th group, so which is the first group that we will analyze in the P block. So why do we call the elements which are sitting at the right end of the table? So if you look at the periodic table, so we have the element sitting at the right end of the table, so which is from our group 13th to group 18th. We will call them as P block elements because the last electron that is entering into these elements, it will be entering into the outermost p orbital, means the last electron will be getting into the NP subshell. So p subshell will have 3 orbitals, each has a capacity of 2 electrons. So the total capacity, the maximum capacity will be what? 6 electrons. So that is the reason why in the P block, right, we will be having 6 groups, 13th through 18th. If you look at the outermost electronic configuration of these elements, it will be NS2, NP, 1 to 6. But the inner core, so we will discuss about it as we go further, the inner core will have variations. Because there are variations in the inner core, right, we will see that some of the properties will have the behavior which is not as per the so-called expected trend. So we will talk about all these things as we go into the discussion further. When you look at the P block groups, right, the maximum oxidation state that a P block element will show will be equal to the number of valence electrons. Number of valence electrons means because the valence outermost arrangement is NS2, NP, 1 to 6, right? So it will be including what? The electrons in the S plus electrons in the P subshell. So that will give us what is the maximum valence. This is also called as group maximum oxidation state or group valence, like that we can say. And these elements, they have one more characteristic feature, they can show variable oxidation states. And we will see as we move towards the right of the table, right, the number of oxidation states that these elements can show will actually keep on increasing. So we will see once we look at the possible oxidation states. But one of the important thing about the oxidation states is, while they have their group oxidation state, they will also be able to show predominantly an oxidation state which is 2 units less. And what we will be able to observe is the first few elements. Like if you look at the respective groups, first 13th group, boron is the first element, 14th carbon, 15th nitrogen. What we will see is that the group oxidation states for these elements, right, will be the most stable ones. But as we go down the group, keep on going down the group, the stability of that other oxidation state, what is other oxidation state? The group oxidation state minus 2, this value. The stability of this particular oxidation state will be increasing as we go down the group. So we will see what is the actual trend and all these things we will discuss about it. When you look at the occurrence of this oxidation state of group oxidation minus 2, that is mainly attributed for the concept called as inert pair effect. So what is the inert pair effect? We will talk about it. Okay, so here this is just the introduction. So we are looking at what are the important terms and things that are involved. But each of these aspects, right, we will analyze as we go into. So the reason for this existence and also the increasing stability of this oxidation state of group oxidation minus 2, which means, see, 13th group, what is the number of total valence electrons? 3. So group oxidation state is what? Plus 3. The other oxidation state that you are talking about here, right, is what? Plus 1. So we are talking about what? The existence of this plus 1 as well as the increasing stability of the plus 1 oxidation state as we go down the group. Similarly, when you are discussing about the 14th, the number of valence electrons is 4. So group oxidation state is plus 4. The other oxidation state we are talking about is 2 less, means what? It will be plus 2. That is with regard to the carbon family. Okay. And the reason for this is what we will be referring as the inert pair effect. So what is the inert pair effect? We will discuss it. Keep it in mind. So this is the representation of the possible oxidation states. We can see 13th group oxidation plus 3. 14th So group oxidation is equal to what? Number of valence electrons. Of course, the 18th group is a different story altogether. We'll have to separate it. Separately study that. In fact, in the other P block, in +1 we have P block where we'll cover 13th and 14th. In +2 we have a P block where we'll cover from 15th to 18th. There we'll also discuss about the 18th group and compounds of the 18th group, particularly the compounds of xenon and all these things. Okay. Now coming to the other possible oxidation states, you can see for 13th group we can also have +1, which is, as I said, group oxidation -2. The 14th group can have +2, also it can show -4. And as we keep progressing, right, because here we will not discuss about the 15, 16, 17, 18 much, because that is what we have as a chapter itself, right. The only thing that you can observe here is that, as I said, right, the number of possible oxidation states is basically what increasing as you move towards the right of the table. So in any period you take, as you move from left to right, what we will see, the number of oxidation states that the elements can show will keep on increasing. You can see 13th we have what? +3, +1. As you go to the 17th, you can see here 17th can show what? +7. They can show +5, they can show +3, they can show +1, they can show -1. So when we go and study about the 17th group elements, we will see examples of all the compounds where the 17th group elements can show +7, they can show +5, all that we will analyze in the 17th group. Okay. Now talking about the P block as such, right, there is a lot of importance for this P block, because if you talk about S block or D block or F block, what are those? They are all metals. Of course, S block is more electropositive metals. D block transition metals will have their own characteristic properties. Inner transition F block, they will have almost similar properties, but all of them at the end of the day are metals. It is only in the P block that you will find non-metals and metalloids. Of course, in P block you will also have metals like aluminum, which is a very electropositive metal, that is also there in the P block. And we know that the non-metallic character, right, will be decreasing as we go down the group. So non-metallic, so this is a counter, non-metallic character will be what? Decreasing as we go down the group. What about the metallic character as we go down the group? Like we have discussed in the S block chapters. If you go from lithium to cesium, right, what we'll observe, the metallic character will be increasing. These two will be counter. Now when you look at the periodic trend in terms of the metallic and non-metallic character, what we will see is in any P block group that you take, the heaviest element, where do you find the heaviest element? Bottom right. The heaviest element will be what? Most metallic in terms of nature. And at the top, what we will see non-metal. And so in each group when you are moving, like say for example, if you take just the case of the carbon family. So carbon is what? It is a non-metal. Then we have silicon, germanium, which are metals. Whereas if you go to the tin and lead, right, these will have metallic characteristics. So we have non-metal, then metalloids, then metal. So we will see that there will be a variation in terms of the characteristics of the elements itself, from the metal to the, from the non-metal to the metals. This kind of diversity, right, we will not see in the other group, like S block, we will not see this kind of diversity. What we will see in S block is lithium to cesium, all are metallic in terms of characteristics, but as you go down the group, metallic nature only will be increasing. Okay, so we'll see that's the importance of the P block in terms of what kind of elements are present in the P block. Now when you look at particularly, because this is the first time we are talking about the non-metals. In S block we have not talked about the non-metals. So what are some of the characteristics of non-metals? Non-metals will have high ionization enthalpies and also high electronegativities. So here we can just talk about the nature of bonding formed by the non-metals. So if, say for example, we talk about metals, right? Metals, they can easily lose electrons to form cations. non-metals, they can gain electrons to form anions. So when you have a bonding between metal and non-metal, right, it will be what? Ionic in terms of nature. Because the metal and non-metal, if you look at the electronegativity difference, it will be huge. So the bond will be predominantly ionic in terms of character. Now you can also have a bonding between non-metal and non-metal. If you look at the bonding between non-metal and non-metal, because they'll have only small difference in their electronegativity, these compounds or these bonds will be predominantly covalent in terms of character. They can be polar covalent also, but predominantly they will be covalent in terms of nature. And how do we particularly identify the non-metals? Because metals, we know metal oxides are basic in nature. When we talk about the non-metals, right, the non-metal oxides are either acidic or neutral. Like say for example, if you talk about carbon monoxide, what is carbon monoxide? It is a neutral oxide. Whereas you take carbon dioxide, it will be what? Acidic oxide. So either you can have non-metal oxides to be neutral or they can be acidic. And in our discussion about the S block, first group or second group, we have seen that the characteristics or properties of the first element of the group, lithium, has got anomalous properties from the rest of the other elements. Beryllium has got anomalous behavior. Almost similar thing we will see here also. The first member of the P block, any group you take, will differ from the remaining members. Okay. So in what ways it will differ from the remaining members? One is in terms of the size, because they will be exceptionally small in size. Whatever the properties related to the size, right, they will all be different for the first elements of these groups, whether it is a boron or a carbon or a nitrogen or oxygen. So this is very much like, you know, the anomaly we see in the case of the lithium and beryllium. Not only that, there is one more difference here. This is only applicable for the P block. This is not seen in the S block. That's why we are mentioning it importantly. The first elements of the groups, right, they will not have, first elements means what? They will actually fall in the second period. Second period means what? Outermost shell is second shell. So they will not be having d orbitals. The first element of these groups, right, they will not have d orbitals. Why? Because they are in the second period. But after the first element, whatever the elements comes, they will be having the vacant d orbitals available. So the vacant d orbitals, right, will be available for the heavier elements starting from the third period onwards. Because third period means what? What is third period means? The outermost shell is the third shell. Third shell has got d level, right? So we'll have the d orbitals available starting from the third period. Only for the second period, right, the d orbitals will be lacking. And as a result of it, what happens is the maximum covalence. So covalence is basically the number of atoms to which an element will be bonded to. The maximum covalence of these elements which are in the second period. So remember, when I say second period means what? These are the, what are these? These are the first elements of these groups. These are the first elements of these groups. Okay. These are the first elements of the groups. Why only a covalency of 4? Because they will be using 1 s orbital and 3 p orbitals. That's it, right? They don't have any d orbitals. Whereas if you go to the further elements, along with the s and p, they will also have the d. It's like say starting from the, we said third period, right? It will have what? 3s and 3p orbitals as well as the 3d orbitals also available. So these 3d orbitals, when they are used for the bonding, right, the covalence can be increased. Like, you know, we can see the example of the 13th group itself. Boron can show maximum covalence of 4. That will be in BF4 minus. Boron is bonded to 4 fluorines. Aluminum can show a maximum covalence of 6. AlF6 3 minus. Aluminum is bonded to what? 6. So how is it happening? Because aluminum is able to use the vacant d orbitals. So we'll talk about these compounds in little later, but just to give the idea. And not only that, the first elements, right, because of their small size, they will be able to form a very strong and effective p pi p pi multiple bonds. Because they are small in size, the p orbitals can be used for effective pi bond formation. Remember, the pi bond can be only formed by the pure orbitals. Either we can use p orbital or d orbitals. So they can form p pi p pi multiple bonds either to themselves or to the other elements. Like you can see, carbon can form double bond means what? 1 sigma 1 pi. Triple bond means what? 1 sigma 2 pi bonds. Nitrogen also. Same way we can have carbon oxygen, carbon nitrogen, nitrogen oxygen. Like we can have the p pi p pi multiple bonds formed between either atoms of the same element or atoms of different elements also. But this is what the characteristic feature of the second period elements, because they are all small in size. Whereas if you go to the heavier elements, right, the p orbitals are moving away from the nucleus. They are getting diffused in terms of the shape. So due to this, the p orbitals, right, will not be able to, so due to the diffused nature of these p orbitals for the heavier elements, they will not be able to form an effective p pi p pi bonding. But sometimes we will see that these heavier elements, right, they will also form pi bonding, but that will be involving the d orbitals. So we will talk about the examples of that. D orbitals means what? Either you can have d pi p pi type of bonding or d pi d pi. See, this notation is what? If you have a pi bond between p orbital and p orbital, right, that's what you call as p pi p pi. This is nothing different. If you have a pi bond formed between d orbital and d orbital, right, what do you call it as? D pi like that. Okay, so even though they are forming the pi bonds with the d orbitals, because d orbitals are having high energy, so the stability of this bonding rate will be less in comparison to what the p pi bonding of the second row elements. Now the other important thing is when you look at the heavier elements, the heavier elements will be able to show a higher coordination number. So you have a compound of the second row element and you have a compound of the any other heavier element with the same oxidation state. So what is oxidation state? How do you get the oxidation state? We have seen this in the redox reaction chapter. Suppose I take nitrate ion, NO3 minus. In this, the oxidation state of nitrogen is +5. We take phosphate ion. In this, the oxidation state of phosphorus is what? Same, +5. But the coordination number of nitrogen is only 3. It is bonded to what? 3 oxygens. Whereas the coordination number of phosphorus is what? 4. So what we will also see is that we will pick up 2 compounds, one by the second row element, other by the heavier elements, having same oxidation state of the element. Where the coordination number will be generally maximum, it will be maximum for the heavier elements. So this is about general idea of the P block. Now we are going to come to what is our focus here. What is our focus? It is the 13th group. See, because other things about the P block, right? In fact, this multiple pi bonds, all these things we will again discuss when we go to carbon family, when we will go to the nitrogen family, when we go to oxygen family. These things we will keep discussing because it will come in every group. Let us come to the area of interest for us in this particular lecture video, which is the 13th group. So what is 13th group? It is the boron, aluminum, gallium, indium, thallium. Now what we will see in this group is there will be a wide variation of the properties. Remember, when we talked about the S block, what we said, whether it is the first or second, we said the properties will be periodic or regular. But here we are going to see the variations. In the first group or second group, when we say going down the group, the radius increases means radius will keep on increasing. When we say ionization enthalpy decreases means it will keep on decreasing. So we will see a regular trend. But here we are going to see some lot of variations. And we will also see what is the reason for these variations. As I said before, right, what is one of the main reason going to be the inner core electronic, while the chemical reactions are dependent upon the outermost valence electron structure. We will see that the inner core electronic arrangement will give rise to the variations between these elements. Boron, right, is a typical non-metal. We will see, what kind of behavior the oxides, because as I said, how do you know element is a non-metal? Based on the nature shown by the oxides, right? We will talk about it later. Aluminum is a metal. In fact, it is a very electropositive element. But we will see that in some cases, right, aluminum and boron also will have some similarities. Gallium, indium, thallium, right, they are having predominantly metallic characteristics. In terms of the availability, right, boron is not very abundant. It's a kind of a rare element in terms of abundance. The main sources of boron are orthoboric acid H3BO3, borax Na2B4O7 decahydrate. Then we have kernite Na2B4O7.4H2O. So there are places where we will obtain this in India, like Puga Valley in Ladakh, Sambar Lake in Rajasthan. These are the places. If you look at in terms of the percentage, the abundance of boron in the Earth's crust, right, is less than 0.0001 percentage by mass. You can understand, it's a very rare element in that sense. The two isotopes of boron are boron 10 and boron 11. So after some time we will see what is the importance of particularly boron 10, right. It will be used in the nuclear reactors. So we will see what is the reason for that also. Now second element of the group is what? Aluminum. Aluminum is the most abundant metal and the third most abundant element in the Earth's crust. You can see after oxygen, which is 45.5, and silicon, right, aluminum is what? The third most abundant element in the Earth's crust. When it comes to metals, it is the most abundant metal. So you can understand the first element is very rare. Look at the percentage of the second element, 8.3% by mass. So in what forms we will obtain aluminum? We have bauxite, which is Al2O3.2H2O. Then we have cryolite, Na3AlF6. Then we also have one more form which is what we call as the feldspar. So we'll talk about it when we go to the metallurgy, the ores of aluminum and the extraction methods, right. So there is another a popular form in which the aluminum will be existing. So where do we find aluminum? So it's available in Madhya Pradesh, Karnataka, Orissa. Gallium, indium, thallium, right, they are less in terms of the abundance. So particularly when it comes to the abundance, right, we are talking about what? Aluminum, because it's the most abundant metal and the third most abundant element in the Earth's crust. Boron, yes, in terms of abundance it is less, but we are looking at here the information about the two isotopic forms of boron, boron 10 and boron 11. Talking about the electronic configuration, right, as we said, all the p block will have what? Ns2, Np126. This is the first group, right, of the p block. It will have what? Ns2, Np1. Now we are going to discuss about the inner core part. We said the inner core part will be different for these elements. Boron and aluminum, right, they have a noble gas core. What is the boron arrangement? It will be helium 2s2 2p1. That is the boron. What is aluminum? Neon 3s2 3p1. So both boron and aluminum, right, they have the noble gas core. Whereas if you go to gallium, indium, right, they will be having noble gas plus 10 electrons in the d. How? Look at the position of these elements. Where do these elements come? So we have boron. This is second period. Aluminum. This is the third period. Then we have the gallium, then indium, like that. So gallium comes in the fourth period. Remember, in fourth period, right, before the gallium, we will be having the 3D series. All our scandium, titanium, vanadium. After zinc comes gallium. Correct. After zinc comes the gallium. So which means what you are having. So here your noble gas element will end. After noble gas element, we are having what? 10 electrons being filled into the 3D level. So what you will have is noble gas plus 10 electrons in the D. And this is where the differences will start coming. Because of the D electrons in the inner core, right? Their screening effect will be less. This is something that we have talked about in the periodic classification of the properties also. Like, you know, the inner electrons are supposed to shield the nuclear. So we have a nucleus. The inner electrons are supposed to shield the nuclear power from affecting the outer or the valence electrons. But here the D or F subshell electrons, right, they will be diffused in terms of the shape of the orbitals. So they cannot have a proper shielding effect. This is what we call as the poor shielding effect. As a result, what happens? The outer electrons will come under more stronger influence of the nucleus. And we will see what happens as a result of it. Okay. So if you go to the thallium, right, you'll have noble gas plus 14F and 10D. So as we see that, you know, the inner core is basically what? Changing. And as a result of it, we will see what is the effect in terms of the properties. Now the difference in these, this is what I was mentioning, the difference in the electronic structure, right, will affect other properties. So one and one we'll go through what are the properties. First we'll begin with the atomic radius. What is the general understanding on moving down a group, any group you take? We are adding extra shell. One element we go below means we are adding one extra shell, right? So what is expected is the size will be increasing. So this is what is expected. So as we are moving down the group, for each successive member, one extra shell is added. So we expect that the atomic radius is basically increasing. But here we have anomaly. See, remember, you know, in all our inorganic chemistry, we have to focus on the exceptions and why they are coming. That is where we will be getting questions. The atomic radius of gallium will be less than aluminum. Why? Because when we are coming to gallium, we are talking about what? After filling electrons into 3D level, we are filling 10 electrons. They have poor screening effect. They are not able to shield the outermost electron, which means what? The outermost electron will come under so much influence of, because nuclear power is increasing. The increased nuclear charge, right, will pull the outer electron so much that the size of gallium is in fact becoming lesser than the aluminum. So you can see in terms of number also, what is the gallium? 135. What is aluminum? 143. What is the reason? The poor screening effect of the 3D electrons. Because when you move from aluminum to gallium, the nuclear power is increasing. But the inner electrons are not able to screen the effect. So the outer electron will come under strong nuclear influence. So you can check our videos on the periodic classification of properties. We talk about a quantity called as Z effective, effective nuclear charge. Means, you know, how much effect of the nucleus is falling on the outermost electrons. So based on that, we will be able to even quantitatively talk about what is the exact influence coming on the valence electrons. So just refer to that video on the Z effective, effective nuclear charge calculations. So this is about the anomaly in terms of the size. So we can see here the atomic radius, right? So from aluminum to gallium, it is decreasing. Then we will see increase. Whereas when you talk about the ionic radius, right, it's interesting. See, ionic radius will show a normal trend, because we are talking about here what? The +3 oxidation state, which means the entire outer shell is removed. The entire outer shell is being removed. Okay, so the ionic radius will have a regular trend, whereas the anomaly is only in terms of the atomic radius part. Now the next property that we will analyze is the ionization enthalpy. What is the ionization enthalpy? General trend, as you go down the group, it must decrease. So it will not be happening that way. In the 13th group, when you go down the group, right, it will not generally decrease like that. Yes, we will see a decrease from boron to aluminium. So normally, what is the reason we will give as you go down the group? The size increases, and that will overweigh the increase of nuclear power. This is the reason that we will give for the ionization enthalpy decreasing as you go down the group. But here we will see some discontinuity between aluminum and gallium, and also between indium and thallium. Again, the reason is what? You are here having a core which is filled by D or D and F, and both these are what? Having low screening effect. Due to the low screening effect, what happens? The out electrons will be under more strong influence of the nucleus. So we can look at the values itself. Look at the values. The ionization enthalpy, as you go from the boron to aluminium, it is what? Decreasing. So first we will analyze only the first ionization enthalpy. First ionization enthalpy, okay. Boron to aluminium, it is what? Decreasing. But aluminum to gallium, it is an increase. Why? Because the size is decreasing, right? The size is what? Decreasing. So the electrons are under more influence of the nucleus. Then gallium to indium, 517 into 558, it is decreasing. Indium to thallium, it is a slight increase again. So what is happening? We will see an increase again here. So where are the differences? Aluminum to gallium, then indium to thallium. So aluminum to gallium is what? We are having the 10d electrons effect. Indium to thallium, we are having effect of 10d electrons and 14f electrons. So this is the trend in terms of the ionization enthalpy. Now if you add up all the three ionization enthalpies, right, we will see that the value will be really large, and that is the reason why this formation of +3 oxidation state by these elements, right, will be difficult, because if you have to form a trivalent positive ion, we have to remove 3 electrons, right, and for that we will require energy which is equal to what? Del H1 plus del H2 plus del H3. That will be a huge value. If you look at the electronegativity, what is the normal trend? As you go down the group, electronegativity values must decrease. But here also we will have anomaly. First from boron to aluminium, it will be decreasing. Then we will see some completely different scenario. Like, look at the values. So boron to aluminum, what is it? It is decreasing, normal trend. But from here onwards, it is what? Gradually increasing. So 1.6, 1.7, 1.8. Again, the reason is what? The poor shielding effect of the inner core, that is giving rise to the discrepancies in terms of the size of the atoms. What is electronegativity? It is a relative measurement, right? So if you have a covalent bond between two atoms, how strongly an element is able to pull the bond electrons towards itself. So generally we will talk about these electronegativity values, right? These are all the values on the Pauling scale. So just refer to our again periodic classification of see, whenever we are talking about the study of groups, right, you should have good command on the videos of periodic classification of elements, because a lot of these things we would have talked about them in the particular chapters of or the videos of the periodic classification, so you can connect them easily. So the electronegativity values, right, all these are what? The values on the Pauling scale. And one more thing about the density, we can see density is what? As you go down the group, density is what? Gradually increasing. So this is what we have seen in the case of the S block elements also. Now the physical properties, right? Boron is non-metallic in nature. In fact, it will be extremely hard. It will have a crystalline structure. I mean, there are various forms of the crystalline structure, like alpha rhombohedral, beta rhombohedral, like that. That knowledge is not required for us here, but you can see this is what the boron crystals, and it will have various allotropic forms, as I said. And because of this strong crystalline lattice, right, boron will have a unusually high melting point. We can see here the melting point value, right? What is it? 2453 Kelvin. So what is the reason for this? The reason for the unusually high melting point of the boron is the crystalline structure. The rest of the members are what? Soft metals. You can see the melting points, right? All of them are aluminum 933. Gallium, so you can see here, gallium is what? Just 303. Now the gallium is having a very low melting point. So it is because the gallium, right, it will have the molecular existence, just like a normal Cl2, like that. It will exist as what? Ga2 molecules. So what we will see is that even when you take this into your hand, the temperature of the body itself will be sufficient enough to melt it. And this could be existing in the liquid state during summer, because summer will usually touch 303 Kelvin, right? So we can see that gallium, because of the low melting point, this is a peculiar thing about the gallium. It can just melt at 303 Kelvin. But look at its boiling point. Boiling point is what? 2676 Kelvin. So it is melting at 303 and it will boil only at 2676. So we have a large gap, and this makes it a suitable material for measuring high temperatures. See, normal mercury thermometer, right? It will have any thermometer, liquid thermometers, they will have a limitation. What is it? Their operating range is between the melting point to the boiling point. Because gallium has a large difference between the melting and boiling point, this will be suitable for measuring high temperatures. We can measure up to what? 2676 Kelvin. And as I said, density what? Will be increasing down the group as we move from boron to thallium. Now talking about the oxidation states and trend in terms of the chemical reactivity, as we said, the oxidation state of 13th group elements, we have +3, which is the group oxidation state, and also 2 units less than that, which is +1. If you look at boron, right, the first 3 ionization enthalpy values, we have seen it is coming to be very high, and that is the reason why boron compounds, right, it will be predominantly covalent. They will not have ionic characteristics. But when you move from boron to aluminum, there is a significant decrease in the total ionization enthalpy value. So that is the reason why aluminum not only forms Al3+, but also it is in fact a highly electropositive metal. If you move down the group from aluminum to gallium, indium, thallium, what we will start seeing is, because of the poor shielding effect of these D and F electrons, the outermost shell has got Ns and Np, basically Ns2, Np1. It will come under more influence of the nucleus. That is what we will say, increased effective nuclear charge. Between S and P, the S electrons will be more towards the nucleus in comparison to P. I mean, if you look at the orbital shape, S will be symmetrically oriented, P will be what? Dumbbell shape. So as a result of it, what we will observe is these Ns electrons, right, the 2 electrons in that Ns level, they will be increasingly held more tightly. In a way, they will be prevented from participating in the bonding. So these Ns electrons, right, will be restricted from participating in the bonding, and that is what we call as inert pair. Why the word pair? Because we have 2 electrons here in the Ns. Inert means they become chemically inert, and it leaves only the 1 electron in the Np level. So only that P electron will then participate in the bonding. That is the reason why we will see this +1 oxidation state. And as we go down the group, right, the inert pair effect becomes more prominent. Why? Because the poor shielding effect of the D and F electrons will cumulatively add up, and we will see that when we reach the final boron, aluminum, gallium, indium, thallium. In thallium, the +1 is in fact more stable than +3. So as you go down the group, the stability of the +1 state will progressively increase. Means this is the order. The stability of the +1 state is what? When you move from aluminum to gallium to indium, thallium, the stability will be increasing. For thallium, +1 oxidation state is more predominant. Whereas if you have thallium in +3 oxidation state, that will be highly oxidizing in terms of characteristics, which means what? It will be getting reduced to +1, thereby it will show what? Oxidizing characteristics. Because when the +3 itself is getting reduced, so it will be able to show oxidizing characteristics, means it will be able to act as an oxidizing agent. So this is the different oxidation states and the trend. So here the things that we need to remember is, one, the stability of the +1 state increases down the group. The reason is Ennett pair effect. And second thing is where the +1 is more stable than the +3 in case of thallium. So that is the reason why, in fact this is another question, why thallium in the +3 will show oxidizing characteristics, because thallium +1 is more stable than +3. So thallium from +3 it will get reduced to +1, means it is getting reduced, means what? It is able to act as an oxidizing agent. So it is showing oxidizing characteristics. And the last and important point is in the chemical bonding, Fossen's rules we will study. Depending on the charge of the ions, right, the ionic characteristics will depend. If you are talking about +1 and +3, where the ions will be more in terms of ionic nature, lesser the charge, more ionic nature. Because even thermodynamically, right, if you want to achieve +3 oxidation state, means more amount of energy has to be spent, 3 electrons have to be removed. So this +3 state, right, will predominantly give us what? Covalent characteristics. So if you have, say for example, indium +1 +3, indium +1 compounds will be more ionic than indium +3 compounds. Okay, so this is how we look at the comparison of ionic and covalent nature between +1 and +3, because thermodynamically or even based on the Fossen's rules also, lesser oxidation state will give us what? More ionic characteristics. Now if you look at the trivalent state, say for example we look at the trivalent state of boron in BF3 or BCl3, the central atom will only be able to get 6 electrons. This is what we have seen in the chemical bonding also. So chemical bonding chapter also, right, we will discuss about these type of molecules as electron deficit molecules. Because you look at it here, BCl3 after forming 3 bonds, it is only having 6 electrons. So the electron deficit molecules, right, they can accept a pair of electrons and thereby they can achieve the stable arrangement. So when it is bonding to the ammonia, so we will call this as a Lewis acid, because it is accepting lone pair of electrons, and ammonia will be what? It is a Lewis base. We have studied about this Lewis acid and Lewis base concept in ionic equilibrium. So we will see there is actually this bond between ammonia, nitrogen of ammonia to the boron, right? It is a coordinate covalent bond. So we can represent this with an arrow. So both the electrons of the bond is given by what? The nitrogen. And the thing that we need to understand here is the tendency to behave as a Lewis acid will be decreasing with increasing size. Means if you look at BCl3, AlCl3, as you go down the group, right, what is it? The Lewis acid tendency decreases. The reason is because if you have a small atom like boron, the bonding will be more effective because it will be able to easily accept the incoming lone pair of electrons, whereas the larger atoms, like when you go to gallium, indium, thallium, they will not be able to easily accept the incoming electrons. So that is the reason why the tendency of acting as a Lewis acid, right, will be more shown by particularly the boron compounds and aluminum compounds. Like you can see in this example, right, boron will be able to form the addition compound, we can call it as, where the nitrogen of ammonia is forming a coordinate covalent bond with the boron of the BCl3. And here we will also have one more phenomena that is happening. The aluminum chloride AlCl3, it is also electron deficit. But what we will observe in this case is the aluminum chloride will be able to achieve this stability means through octet by forming a dimer. So this is the actual structure of the dimer. So here the aluminum is forming. So this is a normal covalent bond, this is a normal covalent bond, this is a normal covalent bond. This is a coordinate covalent bond. You will have a bridge, dimer bridge, that is getting formed. Here you will have a normal covalent bond. So each aluminum will form 3 normal covalent bonds. In the bridge, right, each aluminum has to form 2 bonds. One of them will be a normal covalent, other is what, coordinate covalent. Thereby, because of, see, chlorine will have lone pair of electrons, right? Those lone pair of electrons are used for the coordinate covalent bond here also. So thereby, because of this coordinate covalent bond, right, the aluminum will be able to achieve the octet. That is how the aluminum chloride dimer will exist. And here, right, in terms of the Lewis acid characteristics, what we will be seeing is if you have a BH3, it will be able to act as a better Lewis acid than a BCl3 or a BF3, like that. This is another popular question. Why? Because in BH3, boron is bonded to 3 hydrogens. That's it. Whereas if you look at a BCl3 or a BF3, it is bonded to 3 chlorines or 3 fluorines. Remember, the halogens will have lone pair of electrons available on them. So one of these chlorines will form a coordinate covalent bond with the boron. So this bond is coming from the peripheral atom to the central atom, right? That is why this is also called as back bonding. And we can give resonance structures for that. So we can have alternative canonical structures where in one arrangement this chlorine is giving back bonding, another arrangement the second chlorine. So this is even experimentally also proved. The bond characteristics of boron chlorine bond will be intermediate that of a single bond and double bond because of the resonance phenomenon. So what we see is due to this back bonding, right, the boron is getting electron cloud on it in BCl3 and BF3, whereas in BH3, right, boron hydride, we don't have the scope of the back bonding because hydrogens don't have any lone pair of electrons, right? That is the reason why. So this is another standard question. What is it? BH3 is a stronger Lewis acid than boron chloride or boron fluoride. And if you look at the trivalent state of these compounds when you are dissolving them in water, because these as we said, these ions will have covalent characteristics, they will get hydrolyzed. So hydrolyzed means what? The ions of the particular substance reacting with water. So boron can form tetrahedral, like boron can give us BOH4 minus. So here in this, right, the hybridization will be sp3 hybridization. The boron will be using its 1s orbital and 3p orbitals, sp3 hybridization. Whereas in case of the aluminum, we can have the octahedral complex ion. So the covalence here of aluminum is what? 6. So in this case, what we will observe is that the aluminum will be using the available d orbitals also. So aluminum, it has to form 6 bonds, right, with 6. So it will be giving us what? 1s orbital, 3p orbitals, and we will be requiring 2 d orbitals. Then only it will form 6 bonds. So sp3 d2. So the hybridization of aluminum in this case will be what? sp3d2. So just refer to the hybridization concept in chemical bonding, how we will be able to arrive at the hybridization of the central atom. So in case of the boron, we will have what? The boron tetrahedral ion formation. In case of aluminum, we will be having what? Octahedral. So when you look at the standard reduction potentials, one thing that we will observe is as you move from aluminum to thallium, right, the reduction potentials in +3 stage, they are here. It is most negative aluminum. See, most negative means what? This is having high possibility of undergoing oxidation. Means what? That will be able to act as a good reducing agent. What is it? It will be able to act as a good reducing agent, because in the reduction potential series, right, the bottom elements are what? Most negative means bottom, right? Bottom elements are what? They will be able to easily undergo oxidation, means they are good reducing agent. Whereas if you go to the thallium, right, it is plus 1.26. It is what? Difficult to get oxidized, means it is not very easy to form thallium 3 plus. Whereas just compare these two, thallium 3 plus and thallium, this the second one is plus 1. Look at what is the reduction potential for thallium plus 1, it is minus 0.34, which means what? Comparatively, we can easily form thallium plus 1 than forming plus 3. So that we can see by using what? The reduction potential values. So this is about the reduction potential values and the corresponding trend based on that. Now look at this question. This is a textbook question. Standard electrode potential of aluminum is what? Minus 1. We have seen the table, right? And thallium plus 3 is what? Plus 1.26. Predict about the formation of M3 plus ion in solution and compare the electropositive character of the two metals. So what is it that we can conclude? By looking at the electrode potential, aluminum has got, because it is more negative, means what? It has got more tendency to form Al3 plus ions in solution. But thallium 3 plus, it is unstable, you can't easily form it. In fact, what we have seen, because the thallium plus 1, it is negative, we can form thallium plus 1, we can form easily. And even here we can talk about that if at all there is a thallium plus 3, right, the thallium plus 3 will get reduced to thallium plus 1. If we are trying to form thallium plus 3, means what? It will get reduced to what? Thallium plus 1, because there is more feasibility for the formation of the thallium plus 1. And aluminum, since it is having for the plus 3 stage, the reduction potential is minus 1.66, large negative value. It shows what? Aluminum is a good reducing agent, because it will be able to easily undergo oxidation. And also what we can say, aluminum is electropositive metal. So this is what we can tell by using the electrode potential values comparison. So just again, whenever we are talking about the electrode potential comparison, just go to the redox reaction chapter once, where we have talked about what is the information we can get by looking at the reduction potential values. Talking of reactivity with the air, right, boron is unreactive because of the crystalline form, because if you want to make the boron to react, means you have to break the crystal. Only when it is in the amorphous state, it can react. Aluminum, the thing about aluminum is aluminum will be able to quickly form a protective oxide layer, and once that is formed, right, it will prevent the further reaction of the metal with the air. But if you make boron and aluminum into the amorphous state and heat this in air, right, we will be able to see both of them, they will form oxides B2O3 and Al2O3. And even at high temperature, we can see that the boron and aluminum, they can form compounds with nitrogen, the corresponding nitrites. So this is about the reactivity with the air. Now when we talk about the nature of these oxides, right, the boron trioxide is acidic, because it will be able to react with the metallic oxides, and it will be forming metal borates. So whenever boron oxide is reacting with the metallic oxides, right, it will be forming what? Metal borates. When an oxide is reacting with metallic oxide means what? Basic oxide. So we will see that acidic oxides, they will be able to react with basic oxides, correct? So since boron trioxide is able to react with basic oxides, means what? The boron trioxide must have acidic nature. Aluminum, gallium, right, their oxides are amphoteric. Indium, thallium, we will see that they will be what? Predominantly basic in terms of nature. Reactivity with acids and alkalis. So boron, it will not be able to react with acids or alkalis at the moderate temperatures, whereas aluminum, right, it will be able to dissolve in the mineral acid as well as in the aqueous alkali. So we will see that when aluminum is dissolved in the mineral acid, for example dilute HCl, it will be able to liberate hydrogen gas. And when this is reacting with the aqueous alkali, right, you can see aluminum reacting with sodium hydroxide, it will give us what? Sodium tetrahydroxy aluminate. So it is able to react with both acid as well as bases. That's why we call it as what? Amphoteric. Now another interesting question here is why the aluminum does not react with concentrated nitric acid, because the concentrated nitric acid, right, has got oxidizing nature. So it will form a protective oxide layer on the surface of the aluminum metal, and once the oxide layer is formed, right, there will be no further reaction. So the concentrated nitric acid will render the aluminum passive by forming a protective oxide layer on the surface. So if you look at the reactivity with the halogens, right, so these elements will be able to form trihalides. So this is another interesting question. I think in one of the previous exams also they have asked, not just in one entrance examination but couple of exams also they have asked this question. Why fumes appear around a bottle of anhydrous aluminum chloride? So when you have anhydrous aluminum chloride, you just open it. So what we will see is that the aluminum chloride will get hydrolyzed. So there will be an reaction of aluminum chloride with the moisture from the atmosphere. As a result, we will see that the HCl gas will be formed, and this moist HCl, right, that is what is giving the white color fume. So what is the white color fume here? The moist HCl. But what is happening? Aluminum chloride is undergoing what? Hydrolysis, reaction with the moisture from the atmosphere, and thereby we are getting what? HCl. The moist HCl is the reason for the white color. You can see in the diagram also, right? So you can see clearly when you open the lid of the anhydrous aluminum chloride, you will see that white fumes that are coming out. Now boron, we said, is an anomalous element. So like we have the S block also. In first group we have lithium, second group we have beryllium, in the 13th group, right, we have boron. So what are the anomalous behaviors of the boron? Like we mentioned, if you look at the trichlorides or tribromides or triiodides of boron, when they are hydrolyzed in water, it will be forming what? Tetrahedral ion. Whereas the others, they can form octahedral 6. So like we have seen aluminum, right? Now the trihalides of boron, they will be able to show strong Lewis acid characteristics. Like the boron trifluoride or trichloride, they will be able to easily combine with a Lewis base. Like ammonia is a Lewis base, right? They can combine with a Lewis base to form what? This addition compound. Addition compound in the sense, it is a coordinate covalent bond formed between the nitrogen of ammonia to the boron of the BF3. And even since the boron is the second period element, right, it will be having no d orbitals in the outermost shell. So the covalence is fixed to maximum 4. Whereas aluminum and the other elements, right, they will have the available d orbital, so they can increase their covalence. In fact, in the examples we have seen, right, like AlF6 3 minus, aluminum is having a covalence of 6. So those other elements, the heavier elements, right, they can show a maximum covalence of beyond 4. Like aluminum, it can show 6. Now, while the boron halides are able to act as a Lewis acid easily and combine with the Lewis bases, the other halides like AlCl, for example, we talked about it. So they will get dimerized by the formation of the bridge. Remember, we talked about the bridge. What is it? Aluminum, another aluminum. We'll have so in this bridge, right, each aluminum will form 2 bonds. One aluminum chlorine bond is a normal covalent bond. The other one that I am showing in the red color, right, what are these? These are the coordinate covalent bond. So the octet is completed by what? Accepting electrons from the halogen. So in the bridge molecule, right, in the bridge we will have 2 chlorines. Each chlorine is going to form one coordinate covalent bond. So thereby the aluminums are able to reach the octet. So this is how the other halides will be able to reach the octet. Now just looking at the question from the in text, why boron is unable to form BF6 3 minus. Basically, boron, right, as we discussed before, it cannot expand the covalence beyond 4 because it will have only the s orbital and 3 p orbitals in the valence shell. So because of the non-availability of the d orbitals, right, boron cannot show BF6 3 minus, whereas aluminum can show AlF6 3 minus. We have even talked about this, right, because aluminum can use the s orbital, 3 p orbitals, and also it can use, in fact, in AlF6 3 minus, right, we will see that the hybridization of this will be what? sp3d2 hybridization. So the aluminum can expand the covalence beyond 4 also. Now, talking about the important compounds of boron, right, we have borax, orthoboric acid, and diborane. Borax is the white crystalline solid form decahydrate, Na2B4O7 10H2O. So in fact, we also have another way of representing it, because if you look at the structural unit, right, it will be the tetranuclear unit of B4O5 OH4 times 2 minus. This is the tetranuclear unit for borons. And we can also write the borax formula like this: Na2 B4O5 OH4 times dot 8H2O. Okay, and the borax, when you dissolve this in water, it will be able to give us an alkaline solution. So the alkaline solution of the borax in water, right, is because of the formation of sodium hydroxide, and along with that it will also be able to form a weak acid. So we will discuss about the orthoboric acid later, but this is a weak acid. So the reason why the solution is alkaline is because the orthoboric acid is a weak acid. Now when you take borax and heat it, right, first it will be losing the water. It will be forming the Na2B4O7. On further heating, it will be solidifying into a glass-like material. That's what we call as the borax bead. So sodium metaborate, right, NaBO2, it will be having that glass-like finish. Along with that, we will also get the boric anhydride, which is the B2O3. Now these metaborates, right, they are used in what we famously call as the borax bead test. So borax bead test is used to identify what is the metal that is forming. So typically for the transition metals, right, they will have the characteristic color. Like cobalt, if you take cobalt, the metaborate, right, it will be blue in terms of color. Chromium will be green in terms of color. So we can identify the transition metal by looking at what is the color formed by the respective metaborate, and that is what we call as the borax bead test. Like if you take a borax and heat it on Bunsen burner flame with cobalt oxide, right, on a loop of platinum wire, it will be able to give us the cobalt metaborate. Similarly, we can do the same experiment for the other transition metals also. So this is what is the borax bead test. So this is important. This is used to identify what is the transition element that is forming the bead. Orthoboric acid, right? With the formula, we will write it as H3BO3, but actually we can also represent it like this: BOH thrice, where boron is bonded to 3 hydroxyl groups. But the structure will not be like that. We'll have a different structure. We'll see. It will have a planar structure. We'll talk about that later. But the orthoboric acid, right? It's a white crystalline solid with a soapy touch. It's sparingly soluble in water, and if you want to make it more soluble, we have to take a hot water. How do we prepare it? We have already talked about it. So when you do the borax and acidify the borax, right? So if you take an acidified aqueous solution of borax, then we will be able to get the orthoboric acid. So if you just take an aqueous solution of borax, we will be getting sodium hydroxide plus orthoboric acid. So here if you take an acidified aqueous solution, means we will get the corresponding sodium salt will come. Instead of the sodium hydroxide, we will get the sodium salt. And this is also prepared by the hydrolysis of the boron compounds. So whether it is halides or hydrides, when you do the hydrolysis, we will get what? The orthoboric acid. Because at the end of the day, what is orthoboric acid is what? BOH thrice. So the structure, right, it has got a layered structure of planar BO3 units, which are joined by the hydrogen bonding. We'll talk about it. So we can see here, it will form a ring, planar structure. So in the ring, if you see, each oxygen, right, will be bonded to one boron, normal bond, another hydrogen. So this dotted line is what? It's the hydrogen bonding. So in each ring, so to say, we'll have 2 hydrogen bonds. In each ring that you see, right, there will be 2 hydrogen bonds. Okay, so this is about the planar structure of the orthoboric acid. Now, orthoboric acid is a weak monobasic acid. The thing is, it is not like the protons will be released from the hydrogen attached to the oxygen, not like that. So orthoboric acid is not a Arrhenius acid. It is a Lewis acid. So it is not a protonic acid. Arrhenius acid means what? When dissolved in water, it will give us protons. It is a Lewis acid. It will act as a Lewis acid by accepting electrons from the hydroxyl ion. So from water, when it is dissolved in water, it will accept the electrons from the hydroxyl ion. Thereby it is forming this BOH 4 units minus. So you can see here the orthoboric acid, right? It is acting as a Lewis acid and not a protonic acid. And why it is a monobasic? Because it will be able to accept one pair of electrons from the hydroxyl ion. That is why it is monobasic. Now when you are heating orthoboric acid above 373 Kelvin, we will get metaboric acid. What is the metaboric acid? See, these names and all are important. What is metaboric acid? HbO2. And on further heating, it will get the boric anhydride or boric oxide, B2O3. So you can also call it as what? Boric anhydride. So look at this question. Why boric acid is considered as a weak acid? So first point is what? It is not a, it's not an Arrhenius acid. It's a Lewis acid. So it is not going to act as an acid by releasing H plus ions. It will accept the lone pair of electrons from hydroxyl ions when it is reacting with water. Thereby the central atom boron, right, will be able to complete its octet. That's how the central atom boron will be able to complete its octet. Now the strength of the Lewis acid, right, will depend upon how effectively it is able to accept the lone pair of electrons. So the acid characteristics is not because of the donation of H plus ions, but it is rather receiving OH minus ions. Receiving OH minus ions means what? It will receive OH minus ions from water, and wherein we will see a pair of electrons from the oxygen, right, will be donated to the boron. The other important compound, this is something that we have seen in the chemical bonding discussion also when we talked about the unconventional bonding, diborane. Okay, so normally the hydride formula we should write it like what, BH3, but it will exist as a diborane. How it will exist as a diborane, what is the stability reason for that, we will discuss as we go. How do we prepare it? It is prepared by the reaction between boron trifluoride BF3 with lithium aluminum hydride in dry ether or diethyl ether. So the reaction will be able to give us diborane B2H6, and we can also prepare this in laboratory by the oxidation of sodium borohydrate with iodine. So we have sodium borohydrate NaBH4. So remember sodium borohydrate, lithium borohydrate, all these are what? These are all very good reducing agents that we will use in organic chemistry also. So sodium borohydrate, when it is reacting with iodine, right, it will be able to give us what? Diborane. We can also prepare diborane on large scale. Industrial scale means what? Large scale. By the reaction of BF3 with sodium hydride, you will be able to get diborane. So in terms of properties, right, it is a colorless substance but highly toxic. It will be able to catch fire immediately, and when you expose it to the air, right, it will be able to burn, and that will be an exothermic reaction, highly exothermic. So it will be able to burn in the air to give us what? B2O3. We can call it as boric anhydride or boron oxide. Now not just the diborane, but even the higher order boranes also, they will be able to spontaneously catch fire in the air. Okay, and when we hydrolyze, they will be able to give us orthoboric acid. So if you are dissolving this in water, it will be able to give us what? Orthoboric acid. And when diborane is undergoing cleavage, remember, so what we said, the actual hydride means what? We should write it as BH3. So we can think of it like diborane is what? 2 units of BH3 that are, we can say, merged. We will see how they will be merged. They will be merged by a different kind of bonding. But that's how we can think of it in general sense. When this is undergoing cleavage, right, we will actually get what? BH3. Remember in the previous discussion somewhere, we said why BH3 is a strong Lewis acid. So the cleavage will happen when there is a Lewis base which is ready to give the electron pair to the BH3. Like B2H6, when it is reacting with a strong Lewis base, like a tertiary amines or something like that, or even carbon monoxide, we will see what? There will be an adduct. So the Lewis base is donating electrons to the electron pair to the Lewis acid, which is the BH3. So cleavage, when it will happen? When you are having the diborane reacting with a strong Lewis base. The examples are what? Tertiary amines or carbon monoxide. So here you can see in carbon monoxide, carbon is able to, in coordination chemistry we will discuss more about it, but the way you can think of it simply is the carbon monoxide is able to donate the lone pair of electrons to the boron. Now when you are looking at the reaction between diborane and ammonia, right, it will be able to give us B2H6.2NH3. So in fact the actual structure will be what? BH2 NH3 twice plus, this will be the positive part, and BH4 minus, it will be the negative part. That will be the actual structure of B2H6.2NH3. And if you further heat it, so if you just make them to react, you will be able to get what? The B2H6.2NH3. If you further heat it, it will be able to give us B3N3H6. This is also called as famously inorganic benzene. What is it? Borosine. Borosine is what? It is also called as inorganic benzene. Why it is called as inorganic benzene? If you look at the actual structure, right, benzene means what? You will have 6 carbons in the ring. Here we will have alternative boron nitrogen. Each of them will be bonded to hydrogen, that is there. And we will see that there will be alternative double bonds. So here the difference is the double bond, right, is actually a coordinate covalent bond. Nitrogen forming a coordinate covalent bond with the borons. You can see here this is also going to have a resonance, just like what we have in the case of the benzene. This will also have a planar structure. So that is the reason why we will call it as what? Inorganic benzene. So each of these boron as well as nitrogen, right, they are all bonded to 1,1 hydrogen. You can see it's very much like what? Our benzene structure. Now talking about the diborane itself, because we said, a lot about the diborane, saying, it will have unconventional bonding and all that. So what is it that is different about the diborane? So diborane will have what is called as a 3-centered 2-electron bonding. So the structure of diborane, right, you can see here. So we have 4 terminal hydrogen atoms and 2 boron atoms which are lying in one plane. So you can see here, this is boron, this is a boron, and we have 4, 1, 2, 3, all the ones that I am marking, right, they are all in one plane, okay, that I am marking in red color. Now above and below the plane there are 2 bridging hydrogen atom. Look at this. This is one bridging and this is another bridging hydrogen, that is one above, one below. The 4 terminal BH bonds are regular, 2-centered 2-electron. Means what? 1 electron is given by boron, other is given by hydrogen. The bridge, right, it is actually not the normal bonding, it is what? The unconventional 3-centered 2-electron bond. So the BHB bridge, right, the bridge you can see here, what is it? It is the unconventional 3-centered 2-electron bond. So how we will just look at it? Look at this here. So the bond, right, here boron is giving 1 electron, hydrogen is having 1 electron. This side boron gives 1 electron, hydrogen is having 1 electron. But you see, the bond is involving 3 centers. Here also the bond is involving 3 centers, but the bond is having only 2 electrons. Normal conventional covalent bonding means what? If suppose there is a bond between A and B, either both of them will give 1 electron. That is the normal covalent bond. If both the electrons are given by one atom, that is what? Coordinate covalent bond. But the electrons are shared between 2 centers or 2 nuclei. But here, the electrons are shared between 3 centers. That is why it is called as what? Unconventional bond. You can also see it from this visualization. So the boron atoms, right, in diborane is sp3 hybridized. In BH3, the boron hybridization will be sp2 only, because boron will be having just 3 electrons, right? It will be using what? sp2 hybridization, that is in BH3. The other p orbital will be vacant. So BH3 will be having a planar structure, whereas diborane is having a 3D structure. How? Because each boron is having sp3 hybridized. Now in these 4 sp3 orbitals, right, one of them will be without electron. Like you can see, this boron 1, 2, the ones that are put in normal proper thick lines. The 4th one in dotted line, right, it is what? It is without electron. So 1 is without the electron, and we have shown them in the broken lines. All the terminal BH bonds, right, they are what? 2-centered 2-electron. Terminal means not the ones in the bridge. The bridge ones are what? 3-centered 2-electron bond. Okay, the bridge are what? 3-centered 2-electron bond. So look at what happens in this bridge, right? The bridge is basically the hydrogen is giving s orbital with electron, 1 boron sp3 hybrid orbital with electron, but the other boron sp3 without electron. These 3 orbitals are overlapping, only 2 electrons. Same here also. If you look at the overall shape, right, after the bonding, the merging of the orbitals will give it a banana, the way you can see it, right, above and below. That's why it is called as what? Banana bonding. 3-centered 2-electron bonding or banana bonding. Okay. Now these terminal hydrogens, what do we say? 4 terminal hydrogens and 2 bridge hydrogens. They'll have differences in terms of their properties. Like, when you are reacting diborane, say for example, we can easily replace these terminal hydrogens with methyl groups. but the bridge hydrogens cannot be replaced that easily. Like we'll see variation of the properties of these terminal hydrogens vis-a-vis the bridge hydrogens. Now boron, it will be able to form hydridoborates. What are hydridoborates? Basically, the tetrahedral units of BH4 minus ions. Like when you have lithium, we can have lithium hydridoborate or sodium hydridoborate. All these, we can also call them as what borohydrides. Like you can see, whenever you have the diboron reacting with the corresponding metal hydride, we will get what? These hydridoborates. We also call them as what? Borohydrides. Like lithium borohydride, sodium borohydride. They are all used as reducing agents in organic chemistry. We will talk about them. All these, borohydrides are what? They are good reducing agents. Talking about the uses of boron, aluminum and their compounds, right? Boron has got some very interesting characteristics. It's extremely hard, very low electrical conductivity, low density and high melting point. As a result of it, right, these compounds are used in cases where we'll require high strength, like it can be used for making bulletproof vest, also for making light composite material for the aircraft. Like I'll keep talking about this. I know how many of you have seen this. There is a popular South actor Vijay Kant. He's also having his own party. So when the villain is firing the or the goon is firing the bullet, right? So if you see the movie, you will understand what is actually kept there on his chest. But yeah, not everyone will be so lucky, right? So we will be required to have the bulletproof vest whenever you are getting into the war zone or where you have these tensions. So for making these, the boron compounds will be used. And even boron, I think we have talked about it when we discussed about the isotopes. Boron 10, right, that isotope form will be able to absorb the neutrons, and thereby the metal borides, right, they will be used in the nuclear industry, okay, as controlling rods. So control rods are basically to absorb these neutrons. Now we can see, this is how we will have the controlling rods. They will be used to absorb the neutrons, because neutron absorption is required for controlling a nuclear reaction. And the industrial application of borax and boric acid is for the manufacture of heat resistant glasses, pyrex, etc., and glass wool. So you can see this is a glass wool. And borax is also used as a flux for the soldering of the metals, okay, and for heat, scratch, stain resistance, glazed coating, right, for the earthenwares, etc. So all these, we will be able to use both the borax and orthoboric acid. Even for the medical or medicinal soaps, right, we will be using the boron compounds. And the aqueous solution of orthoboric acid, right, that can also be used as a mild antiseptic. So talking about the aluminium, it's a bright silvery white metal. It's got high tensile strength, and we'll see that because of its high thermal and electrical conductivity, it can be used in specific applications where we require that high conductivity. In fact, if you look at the weight to weight comparison, right, the electrical conductivity of aluminum is twice that of copper. But why in most of the common transmission lines we use copper? Because of the cost effectiveness. Aluminum is also used in various industries in our day-to-day life. Like we have various alloys. So alloys, we'll discuss about them when we go to the metallurgy. Alloys of aluminum can be formed with copper, manganese, magnesium, silicon, zinc. Aluminum alloys, right, they are used in various places, like pipes, rods, tubes, plates, foils, aluminum foils, right, they are used for packaging of the food material. But nowadays we are not using it because of the toxic nature that aluminum can have because of the environmental stagnation. So that is the reason why nowadays when you buy the food, right, like 10 years before and all that, you will see that the food will have aluminum foil or aluminum covering. But nowadays you don't see that, even because of its high strength and less weight, right? We'll see that the aeroplane parts, utensils, even the parts of construction and even transportation, all these things we can manufacture by using aluminum. So basically wherever we will require that property of lightweight and high strength, tensile strength. So these are the two parameters where the aluminum will fit, and all those places, right, we can use the aluminum for the manufacturing of the devices. So this is about, and nowadays why we are using less of aluminum for the domestic purposes is because of the toxic nature of the aluminum when it is getting stagnated in the food chain. Okay, so this is about the 13 group elements, and just while you are going through the video, also make sure that you revise the videos of periodic classification of elements once, and even chemical bonding, particularly the discussion about the diborane, because we have done a thorough video on how the diborane will actually have that unconventional 3-centered 2-electron bond. Okay, so this is about the 13th group, and we will see in the next video of the 14th group. All the best.